My name is Robert Greensands, and I'm the CEO of Hamilton Rose Institute, and also a co-host for the podcast series, The Rose Haven Chronicles. I'm coming to you right now on this gorgeous November afternoon from our Healing Gardens, which, appropriately enough, is located at our Rose Haven Center of Healing in Washington, North Carolina. I took a break from gardening to quickly provide you a setup for this next podcast episode. We're going to be talking to Meredith DeNaples, who is a Deaf Services Client Manager for the North Carolina Blind and Deaf Services. Meredith is an advocate for her population, specifically those who are disabled, specifically those who are deaf. And she provides them assistance and technology to help make their lives better, and also their caregivers and families as well. It's also an insightful conversation about the notion of disability, identity, and having the power and the resilience to seek help so you can better your life. It is a great conversation, and I hope you will enjoy it. And I'm going to get back to gardening. So, take care. So welcome to our Rose Haven Chronicles. You had just stepped into a conversation that Meredith and I were having about awareness of disabled populations as at-risk populations in our community. And so we welcome you to another Rose Haven Chronicles podcast. And with me, as always, is my trusty, maybe not sidekick, but other kick, Caitlin O'Donnell, who is in Durham. Hi, Caitlin. Today we are with Meredith DeNaples, who is, and she will be able to tell you more about what she does, but she is an advocate for the deaf, blind, and otherwise disabled populations. She works for the state of North Carolina, and we met happenstance when her group toured Rose Haven, 2 or 3 months ago, maybe 4 months. Anyway, so Meredith and I were introduced, and I enjoyed our conversations that we had during the morning. And on leaving, I asked Meredith if she would like to do a podcast. She surprisingly agreed. So we were very happy about that. And so that is the genesis of this conversation this morning on our podcast episode. And so I'm going to take a break from talking, which is probably the best thing to do. And I'm going to let Meredith introduce herself and explain what she does. Take it away, Meredith.
Hello, hi. My name is Meredith DeNaples. And my name sign is the M on the side, because, my jawline and everything. So I have M on the side of my chin, and I'm deaf myself. And I work for the Division of Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. I'm the Deaf Service Specialist, where I provide direct support service for the deaf population. I'm sorry, I have my son is here. He's trying to get my attention. Hold on 1 second. I apologize by that. Oh, he wanted his iPad. So anyways, we have a sign language interpreter here that will be voicing for me because I don't voice for myself. I'm going to be signing, and the interpreter will interpret it into English. So again, I work for the Division of Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. I've been here for 1 year. I have many kind of duties that I have to do here, from like A to Z. I have the deaf population that I work with. Also, we help people who are deaf and blind, population for them also. We do several kind of advocacies about effective communication access. For an example, oftentimes we will have, we have the ADA law, America with Disabilities Act, that protects people who have disabilities. And for effective communication as part of ADA law, if a deaf person goes to the doctor and have an appointment, the doctor, if they refused to provide an interpreter because that interpreter would give them effective communication. That's what we do. We help them advocate for themselves on how to get an interpreter there. And also for people who are hard of hearing. So we work with the hard of hearing population also and how they advocate for themselves. So now the Division of Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing also has a program where we provide a free hearing aid, but you would have to meet the guidelines, and one of them is income-based. So if you're interested in that, definitely contact us.
Wow, thank you. That's nice, very nice description. So the reason why a couple of the reasons why I was interested in talking to Meredith this morning is because our mission at Pamela Rose Institute is helping veterans promote wellness and resilience building to better their lives. And we work with women veterans especially, and many who are suffering from PTSD and other trauma. In veteran populations, in both in male and female populations, because of combat, they can be experiencing a loss of hearing, especially accelerated as they get older. And so one of the purposes I thought we could talk about initially is for the veterans themselves, what do they need to do if they are experiencing this? And the second, as a caregiver, how are you able to better assist veterans who may be experiencing hearing loss and don't want to do anything about it because it's a stigma, or they don't know what to do about it? So I guess in a way, if I was a veteran and I was experiencing hearing loss, how could you or your office help me better deal with that?
Oh, yes, definitely. We do have 1.3 million people in North Carolina alone with a hearing loss. And there's not many people that realize it's how many people that we have, that's how big that population is. And there are things that we do. We have the hearing loss support group, and they meet monthly, once a month. And whatever their needs, or sometimes they might go through some kind of denial. And it may take about up to 7 years for this person who has a hearing loss finally resolve and get to the point where they can admit that they have a hearing loss. And I grew up deaf, and I didn't really know who I was or what about deaf culture until I was a lot older. And then I had to kind of realize where my identity came from and realize where this, that about this hearing loss, because I grew up deaf, and it wasn't something that, I didn't really realize until I was older that, oh, wow, I am deaf. And so there are support groups out there. And if anybody's interested in doing these support groups, they have those set up in all the different regions and different areas around North Carolina, and they'll be able to help them out. So they do have groups that they can go and figure out what they want to do or talk to these people in their groups. But we also have a hearing aid program where we provide hearing aids to people, especially if they can't afford them. There's a program that provides a free hearing aid.
Okay, that is a very interesting answer in terms of the 7 years that it takes for somebody to reconcile the fact that they are losing their hearing and it is impacting them and themselves and the people around them. I mean, I know that I'm not losing, my sight is getting worse, which is why I have 5 pairs of these glasses laying around so that I can pick them up at a moment's notice and be able to read something, because guess what? I'm starting to get, I don't want to say blind because that's not the word, impaired. My vision's impaired, right? And I just think of it as, something about my condition that's getting worse and I just have to deal with it. And that's why I buy, these glasses, right? Or for a person whose hearing is they're losing their hearing, And they go, well, you know, it's just a condition of life. I just have to learn how to deal with it. And they make their own attempts to be able to do that. And they don't realize that there are things out there or people to talk to or strategies to develop that can better their lives instead of the negative of hearing loss being a drag on their lives.
This is Meredith. Oh, definitely, yes. And often, as I mentioned before, I was in denial myself about the deafness, because when I grew up, I was isolated from the deaf community. And then once I was able to get into the deaf community, once I was older, you know, I was realized that there's a whole world out there. Because I was, you know, isolated before. When I was younger, I struggled, and I had challenges every day because of that. And I felt so isolated as well. And I just not knowing really what was out there. I didn't have that. And then I was able to get more of that awareness, you know, and where to go. And it really started to feel like, oh, okay, I do have all of these. Yes, I have these. And it was easier for me to accept when I realized that I wasn't alone.
So another interesting facet of that, I think, Meredith, is that we have issues with our identity, right? We struggle sometimes to understand who we are. And maybe something like losing your hearing or your eyesight becomes a facet of who you are. And sometimes we don't accept that as part of who we are, denying it, as you say, in denial, instead of bringing that facet into who we are and having that become part of how we present ourselves to others. And I think there's a stigma attached to that, obviously, especially for people who are not born and disabled, but end up taking that on as they get older or as things develop in their life, right? So I think that's a big part of, at least for veterans, because their identity as a veteran is somebody who's strong and somebody who's able to, you know, withstand things and be courageous in the face of whatever issues confront them, and being resilient, but in terms of themselves providing the resilience where they might understand better if they thought about how being strong means seeking help from others, and so that they can then become a better someone who is fully comfortable with who they are, which would help themselves and their caregivers and their families. So I think we're dealing with, and this is a really bad way of bringing this to your attention, but I think what we're dealing with is an identity that has been built up over time. As a veteran, even people still think they're, you know, are in the military or are a veteran and need to be strong and, you know, stoic and able to handle things as they come in. And I think that's an impediment for them to understand that there is help out there.
Yes, and sometimes that trauma for them too, because just getting back from war or anything like that, any of the services or the branches that they were in, and then coming back and then having this hearing loss or vision loss really impacts them and really does challenge them, especially when, you know, you have that trauma from coming back. Now, from my experience, I'm very accepting. You know, I've accepted my identity. I'm deaf. I have 4 children. My oldest was born deaf and then later had vision loss. So has limited vision. That was my first oldest child. And so I had to work with the deafblind community, you know, for over 10 years. So I was already aware about the deafblind culture. So I was able to communicate and adjust the way I communicated with them to make things more clear. So my son, knowing he was born deaf, could sign, but it really impacted me about the limited in vision. His vision started last year. And I was having a hard time accepting it myself, even though I was involved with the deaf community, the deaf blind community, especially. But my son hadn't had that experience. There was a little denial going on. And I tried to realize that even my son, with the denial going on with him, I said, come with me and then meet some other people who are deaf blind and realize that, you know, you can chat with your peers that have similar disabilities. And that way to get them to understand that and not realize or not think that disabled means you can't do anything. You have lost maybe one of your senses. You just might have to rely on some of your other senses a little bit more, you know, like me, because I can't hear, you know, so I'd have to realize that I need to rely on my vision a little more. And if my vision goes, I have to rely on some other senses. The same for people who are hard of hearing, you know, and now they end up realizing they become more of a visual person because they start relying on some other of those senses. And it's great to help show them that point of view.
I can imagine in your position, Meredith, that it's not difficult to bring in your own personal experiences in helping people understand about their condition and how it might be improved or their quality of life might be improved. You're an advocate and you represent programs, but I think the best advocacy that you probably bring to your interactions with others is the fact that you embody what you are talking about.
Yeah, because often that we have the same struggles and the same barriers, especially with communication access. And that's the primary, you know, issue there. And compared to 10 years ago, today, technology and everything is getting better. It's slowly improving compared to 10 years ago. I mean, I drive through at a restaurant. How could, if I had to drive through, I couldn't do that before. I'd always have to go in and tell them I need to take it out. Now it's easier because we have an app. We have other things. So things are definitely improving because we are spreading awareness and more people are becoming more accepting of this and more friendly to this. So it's making technology has come a long way and it's making it definitely easier for us.
Even the simplest things about what I do as a able person every day that would be impactful to people who are not able-bodied, right? We just don't comprehend. We just don't stop and think about what we do and how that might not be a skill or an ability that someone who's disabled can do. And so we would have to really stop and consciously think every second about, wait, I can do this, but others might not be able to. So I think from a perspective of just me as a general person who's not disabled, having to understand in a way that would make it useful for me to interact with people who are disabled and maybe invoke policy change or some kind of positive change, I really have to invest myself in that. I want to do this. So I guess your job is even harder in ways. Not only are you an advocate for the people that you represent, but in some ways you have to be an advocate for people like me or who are not disabled to really want to be able to do this. And that's a hard sell.
Yeah, and that's why we do the different worlds, because we give them a hands-on experience, because then that's where they really get the impact. Instead of just presenting all day, it gets a little monotonous. They need to get the hands-on experience themselves. They need to have that. And a few years ago, I was teaching over at the university. I had an interpreting program that I was teaching. So I wanted to make sure that the interpreter understood our frustrations and our challenges. So we would have them put like earbuds in, and we just wanted them to not be able to hear anything for like 24 hours, to have earbuds in. And then that would increase our understanding of our challenges. And oftentimes, because, even not being able to hear something for 5 minutes, then it's like, okay, I can't hear it for 5 minutes, but ours is forever. Especially with the lights off. And, with people losing eyesight, sometimes you say, okay, let's turn it off for 2 minutes. And ours is for a lifetime. So you can't see for a lifetime. You can't hear for a lifetime. And I know they get a little bit, 2 minutes or 5 minutes, but that's it.
Yeah. Just an instance to bring this home for me. So we are working with different organizations to build community gardens to help populations like the Boys and Girls Club, the VA, and we're looking at exploring doing one with the Deaf and Blind Center of Beaufort County in Washington. And so I'm designing gardens. That's what I did at Rose Haven, was design gardens, right? Or in the process of that, which is an evolutionary journey in itself. But I was talking to the director of the Blind and Deaf Center about, well, we could come up with a garden map, right? A garden map for where things are. And because that's exciting to me, to be able to map it and design it and show people it. And she said, well, yeah, but it'll have to be a sense map, not a garden map. And you will have to have, you'll have to map the smells too, because the people who are blind will not be able to read a map. Well, they could read a Braille map, I guess, but walking through the gardens, they won't have the sensory signs that I would as an able person, to know where I'm going and what this is and where the bridge is and stuff like that. But you have to be able to build into it senses so that others sensory experience, so that others who are not able can better navigate, right? And I don't want to say it blew my mind, but I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's right. So over here we have lavender, a very unique scent. Over here we have rosemary, a very unique scent. Those are the senses then that we would then start to map a smelling garden with, right? And that's when it really kind of when it hit me about, wow, you've got to really work to articulate and integrate separate worlds together to make things successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Because the sensory kind of a 3D map, so they can kind of feel, and that way they can envision what it looks like. But I think that would be amazing. Yeah, that's something I would be definitely excited to see.
And smell.
Oh yes, definitely.
So I don't know if you remember, Meredith, but well, I was taking your group and you were walking around the gardens and you were walking in the labyrinth, right? And for me, I can see and I can smell and I can hear, and the birds were going like this, and it was a very pleasant morning and everybody was excited and the birds were excited and the squirrels were and everything. And I took all that in. But in a way, usually I try to interact with the people that I'm with, and I'll point things out, and I'll say, "Can you hear the birds?" And for some people, saying that would be, well, no, they can't hear the birds. So how do I, so then I have to be aware of how I communicate. And you are so right. Communication is the essence of your job and advocacy and awareness, right? I need that awareness so that I don't go, well, everybody can hear the birds, right? When that's not true. Or everybody, so in ways you have to be, I don't know, you have to be more invested, I guess, right?
Yes. And, there would be deaf people there. Maybe you can describe the sound, what it sounds like to the deaf people, because we really don't know what it sounds like, but maybe that's something you say. You can hear the birds are chirping and what they sound like.
Yes, but that would, I mean, again, on our part, on my part, and I only represent the, the people out there that are able. On my part, again, that means that I have to consciously stop to think about that. Now, the more that I am involved in gardening and the more I'm involved in different populations that will utilize the gardens, the more that I then become consciously aware of how design and presentation should be something across the board instead of just through my narrow vision, smell, and hearing.
Oh, yeah, that would be good to be more inclusive for all.
So when we were entering the podcast and we were already involved in our discussion about awareness, and you were talking about the importance of awareness. Do you see areas where there's still a big gulf or space or divide between what is known and what needs to be known? And what are some of those areas?
We still struggling today, as we talked about the at-risk population, especially during emergencies. If there's any kind of problems that show up, and we're still having barriers with that. And often we need to think about the safety of the people here, because sometimes they're unaware of something, especially like if somebody has to go to a shelter, they may not know what to do. They're like, well, I can't afford to get a sign language interpreter, so the shelter might not have any communication. If it's a last minute emergency preparedness or trying to do something like that, so that's where we need to have accessibility for everyone. And so we are still struggling with that. And also there are a few places that still will not provide effective communication. Now, for example, a one size does not fit all. For me, I'm deaf. I do understand written language to write back and forth on a note, but you might not now have a deaf person that doesn't understand written English. And there are a lot of hearing people that assume that we all the same and that we need to learn how to speak, that we need to learn how to be able to write back and forth, for that, but that's not all, because American Sign Language is different than English. ASL is a visual language. That's where we do not use that word vernacular, structure as English. Ours is different. So that's where we need to be able to train or kind of give them other ideas for effective communication, because written English doesn't always help. And it's really based on an individual, on what their needs are for effective communication. And some people think because you have a hearing aid or a cochlear implant that's going to help everything, or even a pocket talker, because sometimes, they can help, but they're not perfect. And those are some ideas, but there are some people that don't realize that we have many things here that might be able to help, or interpret, clarifying, we don't, realize that there's just the gamut of different kind of deaf and blind and all that. And there's just so many different variables of effective communication.
Yes, I can appreciate those different avenues that still are unexplored or need to be bridged with able-bodied population and the disabled. One of the things that we're working with is food insecurity. A lot of it is lack of access to food, lack of access to healthy foods like vegetables. There are different populations that are affected differently, but the end result is food insecurity. Young children and families that are that live in poverty or have chronic unemployment, I mean, they exhibit food insecurity, even sometimes more than their parents. It's race determined. African Americans have a higher rate of food insecurity than non-African, even Latino or Latinx populations the same way. LGBTQ populations are more food insecure than non-LGBTQ. Disabled populations are also a high risk or at risk for food insecurity. And I can imagine for a whole number of reasons that you and I have talked about this morning already, that they're food insecure. So in some ways, they are a very traditional, underrepresented population. And the interesting thing, Meredith, is that if you're disabled, you can also be African American. You can also be a woman. You can also be a single parent. You can also be a child. So it cross-cuts, all those ethnic identifiers is cross-cut by disabled populations. So you can imagine how that just kind of accelerates food insecurity, especially if you're, I mean, just think about it. If you're African American, a woman, a single parent, and disabled in some ways, that just adds more food insecurity onto that, right? So in some ways, being disabled, and especially in times of COVID, which just increases everything even dramatically anyway, presents hardships that are oftentimes insurmountable. So I guess there's no question in there. There was just a comment, right? But in terms of that kind of support, you would need to then be more than just an advocate for technology and being able to introduce people to that, right? You also have to be in some ways a counselor to help them with other facets that might contribute to at-risk conditions.
Oh, yes, you're right on about that. It's disabled plus, if you're in a minority or anything like that, yeah, they definitely have higher challenges than a person who would be white. And we had the DEI is the diversity, inclusion, equality, inclusion, the DEI group. So we're doing training, and that's where they need to learn about everybody's diversity and how we can all advocate so we all have those equalities. So everything is the same. For an example, if you're a deaf African person, if you go to court, you might need a sign language interpreter. And oftentimes they might put a white interpreter there. So they need to learn that maybe, that white interpreter doesn't understand maybe the struggles that the African American person might have struggles with. So it would be best to put in an African American interpreter because they understand the same culture and understand the same struggles.
Totally agree. Totally agree with that. But that often isn't the case, right? That often is the case. It's not the case where there is so much foresight that the person who's interpreting, or the person that's the facilitator, does not have the life experience of the person that they're trying to communicate with or about, right? So that would mean that in some ways, this diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of movement, right, needs to be able to teach, or at least to provide people understanding of how to mitigate some of that cross-cultural miscommunication, because they don't have the experience, right? There's got to be ways to be able to provide some common teaching, some common learning things that would make them aware, so at least they can better understand bias on their side, right, when in communication. So
yeah, the struggle is this systematic part of that. That's the big issue.
yeah. But that systematic, which is a very highly charged word right now, right? Institutionalized, systematic. I mean, people, no, oh, no, right? Right? That's loaded. But it is biased though, right? I mean, we all walk around with our own biases. That's a very big bias when it comes to dealing with the disabled population. You got to get, you have to either mitigate your bias or understand your bias, because that will filter through everything. And that, I guess, is the crux of it, right? For people who are able to be able to better, I don't know, blow up bias, or navigate around it or through it, so that they are aware of how that might be affecting their communication, and even more importantly, their understanding of what's going on.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, we have to focus on how to navigate through those biases, how, we can diminish, those where the biases have been impacted.
Wow. A lot of work out there, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But I think we did touch upon it a little bit the last time when we were talking about the disabled population as a whole, experiencing some of the same things that other underrepresented populations experience, but the awareness of that is not there. And so that is sort of something I'd like to explore, from how you see that awareness not being there, and some of the things that can be done to make people more aware of that.
Like an at-risk for a disabled person who often may be kind of ignored in a way, especially a deaf, hard of hearing, deaf, blind, especially when they have conversations, they may be ignored at that time, because oftentimes a hearing person really can pick up information easily, because we can hear stuff from our radio, stuff around us, especially if we're in line, at a grocery store, you can hear all the conversations around us. And unfortunately, we don't have that ability to hear, kind of like an alternative way of learning, especially if somebody's hard of hearing, they have a hard time really understanding what's being spoken on the radio. And we often, are kind of left out, and we have no idea, especially like a hurricane or a tornado. We tend to be at the bottom of the totem pole. And when people get informed, they're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize there was something coming close, because communication wasn't there. They might be out of stock of things, and so how do we handle, that particular part of the population? And I work for the Division of Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and I'm a deaf service specialist myself. That's my position. And we work in our catchment areas, and we talk about, we have a community accessibility consultant specialist that we work together, and we go out and do trainings, and we just want to, help raise awareness, in the public about what we do. And kind of also we put them in our shoes. And we do that by this thing called Different World, we call DDW. So we want them to have a real life or an experience what it's like to be deaf, blind, hard of hearing. So we put them so in our perspective so they can do that. We'll put on goggles or a headset to make it so they really can't hear. We have certain audio that makes it difficult for them to understand what's being said. And it's kind of helping their brain to understand some of the things that we are going through and our experiences. So it kind of changes their mind to understand it a little better.
Wow, thank you. Do you have anything you want to add? I mean, we could go on and talk forever. I know we could talk forever. And maybe we will at some point have another discussion like this. It would only be the third time, right? But I've much enjoyed our conversation. I want to kind of give you an opportunity to say some things that you would like to say, or we haven't covered, or you think are important that the listening audience needs to take away.
Oh, yes. If the audience feels a need to become more aware, to get more training, or if they need more resources or advocacy about the communication needs, they can type in Google, North Carolina, Division, the Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And we have 7 regional centers all across North Carolina. We cover all 100 counties. And they look to see which county, which regional center is closest to them, and they can contact us. We have deaf blind service specialists, deaf service specialists, hard of hearing service specialists. We have all of those staff that be able to help out. So please contact us. We're there to advocate. We're there to help you. And thank you so much. And thanks for having the interpreter here. I really appreciate having this chance to talk with you, Rob.
Trust me, the pleasure is multifold from our end, having you here, and your support team. We often don't get a chance to do this, right? We often don't get a chance to sit down and seriously think about, how to make our lives better for everybody. So I appreciate this opportunity to be able to do that. Until we meet again, I hope sometime soon. Have a great day, all right? Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.